Cans it up, the Penguins will change it. If they're able to come out relatively easy, here's Keith Primo with it first. Primo cuts the inside, scores! There it is! Keith Primo! The much maligned center of the Philadelphia Flyers wins this game in the fifth overtime.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah, and I'm here with Chef B, who's going to tell us about one of our sponsors here. Chef?
Yeah, O&B Puckcast is now brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. The winter months can be especially hard on our homes, from roof damage and peeling siding to frozen pipes and toilet overflows. Call Summit Public Adjusters before you call your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be stressful and confusing. Let Summit Public Adjusters take the stress out of the claim process by having our guys work for you. Get the most for your money and your repairs. The next time the big snow or the rain leaves you with some home damage, contact us for a free consultation. Summit Public Adjusters are licensed in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Learn more at summitpublicadjusters.com or call 215-752-0560. Just tell them that the chef sent you.
Yeah, what was that number again, Chef?
215-752-0560.
That's terrific. All right, we're going to carry on with the rest of our show. And we are back. It is Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode number 199, brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com. And it is our annual Flyers season preview. And I believe last year we did that with our current guest, Kevin Durso from 97.3 ESPN in South Jersey. And since our buddy Chef is not going to be able to make it, I think he's at a charity event and don't think he's going to be able to join us. Let's get right into this and introduce the great Dan Silver before we get to Kevin and say hello. What's on your mind?
Oh, we're just getting ready for another Flyer season. There's always seems to be some kind of intrigue. So it's, same as usual. And I'm sure we'll get into it. Some things that I just really understand. And then I'm interested to see, we know who's going to be in the starting lineup, or we know who's going to be on the roster to start the season, but I'm kind of interested to kind of discuss what especially the defense pairings might look like now. So a lot of intrigue.
Yeah, I have a feeling that what we're seeing right now is not going to be what it's like in even 2 weeks, let alone, 2 months. So without any further ado, from 97.3 ESPN in South Jersey, he's one of our favorites, and you know him as Kevin Durso. How are you, man?
I'm doing great, guys. Great to be back. Great to be on the cusp of a start of another season. It's just great to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Flyers had a decent preseason. I mean, they went 3-2-1. And outside of that first game, Kevin, I mean, it was fairly competitive. I mean, that game came off of heavy skating and scrimmages and all that. And look, as much as we know that the exhibitions really don't mean that much, it's better to watch them play well and rookies play well. We're going to get into that and all that kind of stuff. But right out of the gate, the Flyers announced their opening roster and they place Rasmus Ristolainen on IR. What's your general take on, is there something really that troublesome going on with Rasmus, or what can you tell us?
Well, it's tough to say right this second because the most recent availability that John Tortorella had, everybody was told he's fine, he'll be good to go, and now he's not, obviously. So there's a question that needs to be answered. The team, I believe, had, they had off days the last couple of days. They're doing team bonding for the last 2 days, so there was no availability leading in. Danny Briere is supposed to speak on Tuesday, so that might give a little bit more insight into why this happened, why Ristolainen's not going to be ready to play. This really kind of goes back to he was supposed to play in the preseason finale on Thursday, did not. Was a very last-minute decision, too. He was just not on the ice for warmups, and that's kind of when everybody found out. And now it seems like he's going to miss I would say, now he's going to miss at least the first 2 games of the regular season, and we'll see about the home opener in another week's time because you got a week to figure this out. So we'll see. But for right now, there's not really much to it. They're not going, Tortorella does not really go into his injuries too much and, things like that. And so all we got was he was fine, and clearly he's not. So, at the very least, it clears a couple of roster spots for some other things that you maybe wanted to do to start the year off. They were obviously facing some decisions with forwards, with Tyson Forrester and Bobby Brink, trying to figure out where both of them kind of line up. They were facing that with defensemen too, because Igor Zamula is no longer waiver exempt. So he really needed to find a place on this roster, and sure looked like he had earned it to my eyes anyway. And Emil Andre had been playing really well in the preseason too, and they were clearly liking what they saw. So they were trying to possibly find a place for him too. And then you had the goaltending question with keeping Felix Sandstrom around, the idea of trying not to lose him through waivers, basically, which would be losing him for nothing. So clearly there's a strategy involved there. And this kind of was an easy way to make it all work. So all of those pieces now at least get to be part of the roster. Now you've got to do the work of actually getting the players you want on the ice as part of this, because there's obviously some key decisions that have to be made there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, one thing that pops into my mind, that we were talking about it, that Risto missed some training time because he had to do some army duty in Finland. A lot of people weren't aware of that until just a couple of weeks ago. And maybe that played a role in his maybe subpar conditioning. And I'm not saying challenging his work ethic, but there are some things maybe beyond his control.
Yeah, I have no idea. It's sort of, as Kevin said, to echo what he said with Ristolainen. I mean, part of me, my conspiratorial is like, oh, maybe I don't know, maybe they really wanted to try and get Brink, Forrester, and Andre sort of on the opening night roster, and Risto is really not that banged up, but they figured, okay, we'll put him on the IR and that'll take care of that. I don't know. It's been a lot of strange stuff going on with the Flyers, and the Sandstrom stuff is really strange to me. I mean, I personally would have thought that there would have a much better chance that Wade Allison would have gotten claimed on waivers than Felix Sandstrom. And, it was to the point where there were some national folks writing articles about the waivers process over the weekend, saying that they thought that Wade Allison was the most interesting guy to get potentially picked up by someone, and still nobody picked him up. Now, maybe I'm completely wrong, but to me, the goaltending market, like Martin Jones was out there, he's a lot better than Felix Sandstrom. Like, no one picked him up. People are scared of the Tampa Bay Lightning because Vasilevsky's out for a number of months with his back injury. Maybe the Flyers know something about the Lightning liking Felix Sandstrom, but I just don't think Felix Sandstrom's all that great of a goalie, and I would have a hard time seeing him getting picked up on waivers. Now, again, maybe they know something I don't know. But the other thing I'll say is that I feel like there were a ton of players put on waivers over the weekend. It's probably easier to slip someone through. Now there's all these articles out there, Flyers waiting to put Felix Sandstrom on waivers because they're scared someone is going to claim him. Like, the more you talk about it, there might be more of a chance that someone claims it. I mean, I don't know. The whole thing seems very strange to me. Just waive the guy. I don't know what they're worried about. Maybe they're worried that the Hockey Canada stuff's going to result in Carter Hart getting suspended, and they really don't want to lose Sandstrom. I have no idea, but it's very strange to me.
Yeah, Kevin, drill down on that. I mean, there does seem to be this obsession with keeping Sandstrom and not being caught with a lack of depth, at the goaltending position within the organization, something they've had some nightmares about going back a couple of years, where it effectively ended the tenure of Ron Hextall, just to be specific. So what say you?
Yeah, so the Hockey Canada thing is definitely a factor here, because in the event that something were to happen with Carter Hart, that's kind of, and I know they have Cal Peterson down there too, but basically imagine if you don't have Sandstrom down there as well, then you're leaving your minor league team, which should have a lot of talent on it, with Nolan Meyer as your starting goaltender. And I don't think they want to do that either. So that's part of it. But I also kind of wonder, and this has been talked about a little bit too, maybe there could be something where they would try to work a trade in this. And instead of just putting him on waivers and running the risk of someone taking him for nothing, that there may be something that Briere's working on that could involve Sandstrom, and that way they get a little something in return. It wouldn't be substantial by any stretch, but better than nothing. So those are possibilities as well. The idea is that obviously what they've done to this point, especially since it's a move like putting Ristolainen on IR, is buy them some extra time to just move everything down the road for a few more days. It gives you another week's time to think about some things, to figure out where you want to go with it. This is from the very beginning of the preseason. This was talked about as a possibility that they would carry 3 goalies. It's not now. Does it make any sense? No, it does not make sense in the long run to be carrying 3 goalies and having one guy sitting here knowing he's not the backup to Carter Hart and kind of waiting in the wings to figure out what you decide to do with him, because he's not going to be playing in games. Let's be clear about that. So that part is confusing. But there are a lot of things in play in terms of how this could work itself out. The obvious is just that eventually he gets placed on waivers somewhere over the course of the next week, and that works itself out. But there's other avenues that they could look into as well, particularly that trade possibility. Just in case, maybe you're making phone calls with somebody, and maybe that's why. Maybe that's why Tampa didn't go after anybody either. It's a distinct possibility that Tampa had Martin Jones waiting there in front of them. It's a perfectly reasonable guy to go out there and take a chance on when you need a goaltender. But maybe they're working on something for somebody that they like better. So again, yeah, I agree with what Dan was saying, that maybe there's something that we don't know, but certainly it is confusing to at least go into those first few games and have a guy who's taking a roster spot that's not going to play.
Sure. No, absolutely. So why don't we dig into some of the players that are on the roster now? And as we say that, we realize it could change very quickly as other decisions are made, maybe some transactions that we can't, that we can't figure out that could be materializing over the next little bit here. Let's talk about some of the forwards, particularly Brink and Forster. Forster, it seemed like it was in the bag, and he would have had to just really play poorly to not be on the team. And I think they graded on a curve with him or maybe they included what happened last year and they're looking at the balance of everything he did, because I thought by the end of camp that Brink had basically eclipsed him as the best younger forward on the ice.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, here's kind of my take on it. First of all, in regards to Forrester, I'd even said in the past, to me, he would have had to have fallen completely flat on his face in this training camp to not make the team. That was my kind of feeling about it. Yeah, I think a lot of what happened last year carried over. But you were getting to a point down the stretch of that preseason where it's like, listen, if Bobby Brink does not make this team, given what he's done, you can't do much more than he did in the preseason and come away not making a team. If that's the way that the result's going to be, then there's not much more he could have done otherwise. So I'm glad both of them are there on the roster, at least to start this out. But there's still a question mark with this, because they still have to find a way to get both of them into the lineup potentially, if you're going to go by the play the kids method. And as long as John Tortorella continues to talk about not breaking up the fourth line, that's going to be a challenge. So there's a possibility that they could be splitting time in the early going. And I know that that's not, people aren't going to love the sound of that, because it means somebody who's a young guy is probably sitting in the press box kind of on a rotating basis for the time being. To me, it's not going to be something that's going to be permanent, because, let's this way, nobody was expecting, based on everything that was said, that Rasmus Ristolainen was going to be on IR to start the season. Now he is. So that kind of opens some things up on the defensive side for how you solve that problem. It's inevitable that at some point a forward, and maybe it's a forward who is a key part of the future too. It could be a forward like Owen Tippett or a forward like Noah Cates who ends up with an injury somewhere, and then that opens up a spot. So, you have to be prepared for that possibility and then go from there with how you put them in there. But they certainly have to figure that out. And the fourth line thing is probably going to be a key part of this. I know they like them together to start this whole thing, that line of Delorier, Paling and Hathaway. And I think over the course of the year, fans are going to come to like what Hathaway brings, just because he's kind of that prototypical flyer type. I'm really intrigued by Paling, because Paling, I had said this yesterday when we recorded YWT. Paling was taken 2 picks before Morgan Frost in the draft. Now, he's not necessarily a kid or he's a kid. He's not necessarily a prospect anymore though, but he is 24 years old. He does still fit the timeline. If Morgan Frost is part of your intrigue for the future, then so it should Paling be, especially for 1 year on a 1 year contract, $1.4 million. It's not, that to me is not blocking anybody. That's taking a chance on a guy who could actually have a bigger role than people think. It's the Deloriers, the Hathaways, even guys, you got to play them, but even guys like Cam Atkinson kind of fall into this category where it's like, listen, they don't have a long-term future in Philadelphia, but they do have to play if you want to find a way to move them down the line. So there's got to be kind of a method to all this. And I'm intrigued by how they decide to kind of get these 2 young guys, these 2 new, kind of the fresh blood of the lineup, not that Forrester is, he was part of it last year, but still trying to get them into the lineup.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, yeah.
I mean, the obvious way, right, that a rebuilding team would try and fit them both in the lineup is you put Scott Lawton on the fourth line with Ryan Poehling and Garnet Hathaway, right? But
exactly.
But Nicholas Delorier is signed for the next 3 seasons. Like, I don't know. Is this really a guy that you're going to just want to bench most nights? I mean, it does feel to me like they really want to keep the fourth line together, and they were good. I mean, it brings an identity. Like if the Flyers were a cup contender, I'd be like, yeah, that fourth line, like keep them together every game, right? But now the decision is you've got Tippett, Farabee, and Lawton down the left side, and you've got Konechny, Atkinson, and Forrester down the right side. So there's no, if you're not including Brink in that, those top 3 lines on the wing. So the question is, okay, where does he fit in? And there's no answer, because as long as all those guys are around, I mean, the answer for me is I would be looking to trade a guy like Scott Lawton, but I know that he obviously brings a lot in the locker room. He's probably the closest thing that this team has to a captain. Maybe, I guess Couturier's back now, Atkinson's back, so maybe it's a little different with those guys. But it is going to be very, very interesting to see what happens with Brink and Forster. I mean, you want both of those guys playing substantial minutes as well, especially on the power play. So I don't know what they're going to do. It is hard for me to think that they might break that lineup. I mean, maybe Delorier doesn't have to play every game. So that could be a solution for some games. But if you want Brink and Forster in the lineup for every game, you're going to have to figure that out. And then the defense is interesting to me because, Risto's on the IR, and they clearly wanted both Zamula and Andre on that opening day roster. But I would assume they also want both of them playing, which begs the question, okay, what is going to be those top 3 pairs? Are you going to have 7 defensemen on the bench and kind of rotate some guys in? I don't love that solution. But if not, who are you sitting? Or, I guess Mark Stahl, they've talked about could sit some games. I can't imagine he's going to sit opening night. Sean Walker, John Tortorella has gone out of his way to talk about how well Sean Walker has played so far in the preseason. Can't imagine they're not going to have him in the lineup for opening night. I don't know, maybe Nick Seeler is a guy that you sit, but he's been a good team player, and I don't know. So the defense is going to be interesting as well to see what happens for that opening night starting lineup.
And Ristolainen kind of clears that up a little bit because of the fact that when it was 8, it was near impossible. Because to me, the way that you would have to go about it is that if Ristolainen was still part of this and was an 8th defenseman, Sanheim and Ristolainen are probably playing every night just based on merit alone, just because of their veteranship and all that type of stuff. And then you're trying to figure out beyond that, you're going, York's got to play, Zamula's got to play, Andre's got to play, and you've got 3 other veteran players that you would have to fit into one spot, and you would have to try. I want to see John Tortorella, given the way that he manages a lineup, sit out 2 of those guys on a nightly basis. I just can't see it. So, at that point, the easier thing to do would be just to send Andre down and give him 23, 24 minutes a night in the minors and let him play in a top role. And then when somebody goes down, you can call him up and he can play. But that's why this works for right now, because at least now you're trying to only rotate 2 of those guys in and 1 guy out, and it might be Stahl or Seeler or Walker on any given night. And I think that that's the rotation that they should try to follow, at least at the beginning, because I got to imagine that Zamula and Andre are not here, are not on this roster going into opening night for one of them to sit on opening night. The idea is if Andre wasn't close enough to making it, then I think they would have just as easily said, listen, Ristolainen can sit out of the lineup without going on IR if we just want to cut Andre. If it's that simple, they would have just done it. They want to keep seeing Andre. They do like a lot of what he brings. They like that Tortorella loves that he's fearless, that he's willing to go out there and make mistakes and then comes back and makes the right play the next time out there. Particularly, and this is kind of ties the whole conversation together a little bit, because that last preseason game, the 4th line was the line that got on the board first, and Andre was out there as well. And you saw Andre kind of have these moments that when he gets the puck, the poise that he has in terms of his quick decision-making from an offensive standpoint. And I think that they're very intrigued by that. They're intrigued by his skating ability. His outlet passes are really good. He definitely looks the part, and it's going to, this is what a rebuilding team should do with a player like that is, there's nothing wrong with trial by fire here and seeing how he handles a few games at that level before you decide whether or not he's staying up here for maybe the bulk of the year, or if he does go down. At least, it's worth giving him a shot for the preseason that he did have.
Yeah, just some things popped to mind. Sealer is at a point where he's kind of maxed out his value in the league. So it's like, if this experiment, depending on what happens, particularly I would think with Zamula, if Zamula kind of stabilizes his spot in the lineup, that could be something where you get an injury and they want a third pair of defensemen on another team. The Flyers have plenty of depth. They have guys like Ginning. They have Ronnie Attard. And, they could just maybe want to get a look at Emil Andre. Personally, I understand they want to take a look at him. I have a feeling his immediate future is probably going to be in the AHL and get some of those mistakes out of his game. But he has the highest ceiling, and that's why I feel that way. If you have somebody who has as high an offensive ceiling as I think he does, probably even at least as high as Bonk, if not more, just from an offensive standpoint in terms of puck handling, passing, vision, the whole 9 yards. I want to make sure that he gets a lot of time and gets used to the North American game. And that's a factor with that. But also, I'm thinking that what we're seeing here is a trial with somebody. They're taking advantage of this time. And it could be a little touch and go for all of these players for the first, I don't know, like 10, 15 games. And then it will kind of sort itself out. Dan?
Yeah, no, I think Andre is already the second best offensive defenseman on the team. And he's also good defensively. And what Kevin was talking about and what John Tortorella specifically has mentioned a number of times is he'll make a mistake, but then he'll come back on the same shift and sort of try another high risk play. And it's worked out so far. Like in that last preseason game, he made a bad turnover behind the net. And then on the same shift, he made like a sneaky pass, almost like through the crease that worked out fine. And those are the kind of things that I think John Tortorella likes seeing, that he's willing to do that. Seems like Emil Andre is very mentally strong. He's like the opposite of Travis Sanheim from that perspective. And so he's a guy that I would love to see in the lineup for most of the season, because he's shown me more already than a lot of these guys have shown me for the last number of years. So I would want both York and Andre in the lineup. I would have those guys as the top two guys on the left side and just, ride it for as long as he goes. I mean, Andre's been playing in the professional leagues over in Sweden for a number of years. I don't know, we'll see what happens with him in the NHL, but I wouldn't be surprised if he can play most of the year in the NHL and get some decent minutes. I mean, he also probably should be the guy on the second unit of the power play. I mean, Travis Sanheim we've seen enough of Travis Sanheim on the power play. He's not a good power play defenseman. Travis Sanheim's strengths are, skating the puck up the ice and, in the offensive zone, he can cycle it a little bit, but he's not really a point guy in the modern day NHL for a power play. So I think Andre could be your second unit guy and get a, second pair even strength minutes. Maybe I'm overreaching right now, but that's kind of like what I see from him right now.
No, I can understand that. I just have concerns about with how important he is right now to the team. I want to make sure that he's coached up and can, if he's going to have down moments, I'd rather have his beginning down moments in the AHL. But I tend to be more conservative. But I'm only saying that, though, because of how highly I value him. And I know the Flyers are showing that through their actions, having him on the team, having made more mistakes than a guy like Tortorella usually has a tolerance for. So that just goes to show you and point out what Dan is saying is correct, Kevin, is that they really feel good about him and what is largely a barren defense, and why most national pundits think that the Flyers are going to finish lower in the standings as opposed to higher. It really is all about the defense. And if that's the case, why not sort things out and see who can play and who can't play? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And, for me, another reason why I agree with the ranking that they kind of have going for this is not necessarily anything that the Flyers did. It's more, I think that a lot of other teams got better over the course of the offseason to kind of push the Flyers, maybe, and not much, but maybe a couple spots down from where they were a year ago. And that can always change depending on what kind of situations you go through. you lose players the way they did last year in terms of injury and guys out for season-long type stuff, you're going to be a worse team than you are on paper on day one. It's just the way it goes. You want to see, and this is kind of where the conversation with Andre comes into this too, is those are the guys you want to see having success over the course of the year. The reason why you came away, more so, look, the offseason had a lot of other things involved with it beyond, the way that the season ended for certain players to make you feel good about where they're heading in terms of as a franchise, in terms of what they've decided to do, the direction they're taking now, things like that. But when the season was wrapping up and you see Owen Tippett having really good stretches of games and scoring goals the way he was, and you see Noah Cates finishing off the year that he did, his rookie season, the way he did. And even, flashes from Cam York at the end of last year too. He had moments, and them fitting guys in that now are on your radar. Getting, Ronnie Adder got a couple games last year. Adam Jennings got a game last year. Guys like that getting even just a chance are putting them on your radar. And Andre was going to be the latest one because he was just signed at the end of last season. He was just coming onto the radar and then came over, and now you're already seeing the skill set that he has. And so he fits into this, and you want to see him have success. I don't disagree with the fact that, he probably is a second power play material kind of guy right now. I to be honest, I'd be interested to see how the first handful of games play out and how much, if he remains as fearless as he was in the preseason. I'd love to see what he's able to do. He's got a good shot. We haven't really seen much of it yet in preseason, but he's got a good one that if he uses it, Cam York's not necessarily a shoot mentality guy on that first power play right now. If he's playing first power play, I wouldn't be shocked if things are going successfully for Andre, if he got power play time, that they wouldn't even try to bump him up to first. If that's the case, if he's the one who's leading the charge, I think Tortorella would make that move especially because if you're already, we kind of know how this goes now from a year of kind of the John Tortorella tactics and things like that, that if he really likes you, especially after a preseason, he's going to use you in more favorable roles. So if Andre comes out of the gate playing really well and York kind of doesn't have it going from just a power play perspective, then Andre will get more minutes in that respect. That's just the way that it's going to play out because that's how we've seen it. And, while we're talking about Andre and York specifically as the younger defenseman on that group, I do want to bring Igor Zamula into this picture too, because he put on 20 pounds in the offseason, and it's noticeable. And I thought it was noticeable, especially in that road game that they played in Boston, when he actually had to play some legitimate NHL players, not the lineups that Boston brought to Philly or that the Islanders brought to Philly, but that group, and didn't look out of place. Didn't look like he was getting pushed around as much like he did in the first, those first trials that he had being an NHL player. So I'm hopeful for him as well, because I think that he could have a much bigger role on this team than he's had in the past, because of the fact that he's bulked up and done the things he needed to in an offseason to prepare himself for NHL play again. So I'm hopeful for him as well. And those three guys, I hope we're talking about them all season long, because that's the sign of progress. If you can get those three guys playing significant roles, taking steps in their development, and carving out their place for the future, that's the thing that will be a positive going, throughout the course of the season. When we're done with this season, as we look back, that's what we want to be talking about.
Yeah, Dan, I know you're not as high on Zamula as maybe you have been in the past, but coming off shoulder surgery, yet still able to gain some really significant amount of weight. I think the Flyers feel that it's Zamula's time to get a good chance. He had a good offseason in terms of compliance with what the team wanted him to do. And now it seemed to be the time. He's not waiver eligible. Put him in the lineup, let him play, and see if he can, sink or swim.
Yeah, I like Zamula. I mean, I liked him a lot at first. He kind of, to me, had that kind of like it factor, popped a little bit. Maybe Kevin's point about him putting on 20 pounds is going to be really important, because maybe that's the reason why he hasn't been able to sort of flourish at the NHL level yet. So those taller guys, it can take a little bit more time. But yeah, I think he's a pretty solid defenseman. I think he's kind of like more in the Sanheim mold in terms of not having the soft offensive skills that guys like York and Andre have. And I tend to side with those guys a little bit more in today's NHL. It just seems like those guys are, better able to transfer those skills into what's going on these days than guys that are out of like the Sanheim, Zamula mold. Just when you look at the young defensemen that have been having success in the NHL recently, it's more of those types of guys. Whereas I'm trying to think of The fast skating Swedish defenseman that I forget who took him a couple years ago. Detroit, not Vancouver or one of those teams, and then like even Jacob Chikrin like got off to a really good start, and he's kind of fizzled out a little bit. And he's one of those guys who's a really good skater, kind of like a Sanheim. I want those guys that are able to make the quick outlet passes, and I just a little bit more of a fan of that type of playing style right now. But I'm interested to see what Zamula can do. And we're going to get a chance probably to see a decent amount of both of those guys in the lineup early on.
Yeah, I mean, I like defensemen who have those kind of nuanced puck skills, can make short passes, and go from tape to tape. And it's something that Tortorella's been emphasizing in the camp. He doesn't want the guys that bank the puck off the wall or the glass. He wants them to look up the ice and get the puck out faster and onto a streaking forward, as long as they haven't cheated on the play. But let's look at, speaking of forwards, what do we think these lines? I know they change them all the time, but to start out, it looks like Couturier is going to be he was skating with Brink. And then there was either Farabee or Forster. Can you make some sense out of this, Kevin? What you think what they were at practice with, at least what they're going to start with on Thursday night in Columbus?
Yeah, so I'm gonna pull up the most recent ones that I saw from the most recent practice and kind of go off of that. It was interchangeable pretty much, except for that fourth line that we talked about. So
right,
there's definitely going to be some rotation there. I do know that they really seem to like. They kept Lawton and Cates together a lot during the preseason, and I think that probably has a good chance of sticking going through. I think they also like Frost and Tippett together, and I think that duo right there you saw had a little bit of chemistry in the last couple preseason games. Frost and Tippett were really starting to piece it together. So I believe in the last preseason game it was Lawton, Cates, and they put Atkinson out there with them in that situation. So that certainly is an interesting, that's an interesting line altogether. And Atkinson kind of came along as the preseason went along, after he was supposed to play in the first one and then didn't, kind of last minute again, and then was out a couple days of practice. He did ultimately come back, play the last 3 preseason games, scored in the last 2. So you're starting, you're seeing that guy, the guy that they had from that first season that he played, and seeing the signs that, he's still a go to the net kind of player. And he kind of used those, especially those last 2 preseason games, to try to take some contact, to try to get through. Couturier did this as well. And Couturier put up some points in those last couple preseason games too. It's not going to be perfect for those guys. So that's why I'm kind of more intrigued about the guys around them and how they kind of help them shake off the rust, so to speak, because the guys around them, especially the guys like in that situation where Atkinson's playing with Cates and Lawton. Cates and Lawton, we know what to expect from those guys, and especially Cates at this point. I mean, to me, I would say the thing to expect with Cates even more so is I'm so intrigued by what his offensive upside could be, and I'm not saying it's going to be through the roof or anything like that, but I want to see what kind of next step there is, because I think now that he's proven that he can play at this level and that he can defend at this level, if he makes plays like he did in that preseason finale, where he starts the play in his defensive zone and then goes to the net when he's got a teammate with him, right, he'll be on the board way more this year than he was last year. And that would be a huge positive for a guy who I think is, really quickly become a piece that went from kind of being an afterthought in the prospect pool to now being probably a centerpiece of the rebuild at this point. I mean, he's been talked about so much when it comes to the way that John Tortorella feels about him, the way that the rest of the team feels about him. It's because there's a trust factor for them with him. They know he's going to play the right way at both ends of the ice, and hopefully that translates to more offense. But certainly, all of these other guys that they've had, especially, as you kind of break it down, like I said, I think, the last one, so they switched it. Konechny was playing with Cates and Lawton most recently in the last time they practiced, which was Saturday. And Atkinson was with Frost and Tippett. So it kind of goes both ways, but Frost and Tippett was definitely linked together the entire preseason, and Cates and Lawton were too. They were just together the whole time. You kind of interchange the other pieces. Konechny had played with Couturier for a little while in the preseason as well, and then kind of the emergence of where you're going to put Forster or Brink kind of changed some of that up a little bit. And the other piece of that puzzle, by the way, is Joel Farabee, who I'm really intrigued by also because, this is a guy who didn't get the chance because of the surgery that he did have, didn't really get the chance to have the offseason that he typically would have going into last season. And you could tell by midway through the season, you could tell that he was spent in terms of conditioning because he didn't get to have the training camp that everybody else did either. So now that he has, I'm really interested to see what kind of year he has and if he can kind of return to that form offensively that we saw maybe during the COVID shortened season where he was able to put up 20 goals in 56 games. If he could come anywhere close to that kind of pace. So if he could have a 20 to 25 goal season and start to reemerge as that player, I think that would be a great step forward considering what last year was. It wasn't a bad year, but it wasn't what we've come to expect from Joel Farabee from his rookie year to the way that his second year went, where it looked like he was taking a massive step to having this surgery and now trying to come back from it, and trying to be closer to the player that he was in those 2 other seasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan?
Yeah, the pair that I think was really interesting, just from a chemistry standpoint, it really looked like Couturier and Bobby Brink were getting a lot of chemistry going when those guys were together. It looks like their skill sets kind of complement each other. They're both very intelligent players. It's funny, I thought Frost really gained momentum towards the end of the preseason, and I thought his best 2 games were the last 2 games of the preseason. He set up a super nice goal against the Islanders to Cam Atkinson, where I watched it and I'm like, is Morgan Frost like skating this fast around these guys, or are the Islanders players just not moving at all? Because Morgan Frost like went around 2 Islanders guys like they were standing still and then played a perfect pass through 3 Islanders guys with like the Bermuda Triangle right on the stick of Cam Atkinson, who buried it. And so that's kind of an interesting, something like Tippett, Frost, Atkinson could be interesting for me. There's also, Tippett in that scenario would be the guy on the left wing. You've got a lot of right wingers with Konechny, Atkinson, Forster, Brink, and Tippett. So you've got like 5 pretty talented guys who naturally are right wingers. So it looks like maybe Tippett will be one of the guys on the left, which was not a great experiment last year. We'll see if that improves this year. Tippett had a really nice goal against the Islanders where, I don't know if it was Frost or Forster, kind of found him skating in on the left wing, and he came in and he had breakaway, first shot was saved, and then he buried the rebound. So maybe he'll get more comfortable coming in on the left wing. That's a better shooting angle for him as a right. But I think Farabee's going to have a rebound year. I'm a big fan of his. I think he'll have a big year. It's sort of, and I don't know if we're at the point of the show, but like the forward group to me is actually a pretty damn good group of forwards with a lot of potential. And it's sort of, I've fallen into the trap the last number of years, not last year, but kind of the years before that, of being like, man, this team looks like they could be a playoff team. This year, I've kind of mentally resigned myself to the fact that this is going to be the bottom of the rebuilding barrel. And, this is going to be the bottom. Next year, it's going to start going up. And I think part of that was my expectation was that Carter Hart might not be on the team for a large part of this season. But now, obviously, it looks like he's going to be on the team for the foreseeable future. So I find myself asking the question, like, is this team actually a lot better than myself and other people around the league are giving them credit for? The defense still looks like it could be a dumpster fire, but some of these guys were decent in the preseason. If Zamula and/or Andre proves that they can be a second pairing guy on the left side, and Cam York takes that step forward, like it kind of looks like he might on the left side as a top pairing guy, and Sanheim put on a bunch of weight. He doesn't look like he has got the man boobs anymore. No offense to anyone out there, but I haven't seen him without a shirt off this year, but from what I heard, he's put on a lot of strength. So I don't know, is this team better than a lot of people are giving them credit for? I don't know, but I think that this forward group could actually be pretty damn good for real.
Yeah. Before we step into that, just for a little perspective, a few numbers. Okay. Last year, the Flyers were 29th in goals. So they've subtracted Kevin Hayes and Ivan Provorov, who's a better 5-on-5 offensive defenseman. Okay. and they were minus 53 in goal differential. And this is with Torts and the guys competing, okay? On the power play, they were last. The year before that, they were last. The PK was 26th, although they now have acquired a couple players in Atkinson and Couturier, or welcome them back. That should help in that regard. And of course, they've lost a big minutes defenseman, so that's going to hurt. So, one step forward, two steps back, or maybe the other way around. They were 5-13 in OT that had consistent problems there. So, and this is coming off an era where they're 7 of the last 11 years are out of the playoffs. Where prior to that, 16 of the 17 years they were in the playoffs. So, with that as a backdrop, they're adding young players. They've subtracted some veterans who have a proven performance. Are we being overly optimistic in light of everything Dan said in terms of this forward group? Do we need to take like a chill pill and think, well, okay, we're coming from way down. It might get better, but there's also reasons to think it might level out as well.
I think you're hoping for the best of both worlds in terms of that the results don't necessarily take them out of play for the draft position, but that you do get more production and feel more comfortable with guys who could stick around for longer term. First to me, the thing that like for me that puts it in perspective is that pretty much every year without fail at this point, there's inevitably some sort of injury that changes the dynamic of the way that the roster looks, and not in a short-term kind of way. So I'm not sure, maybe they won't have a particularly long-term injury this year, but I'd be curious to see, first of all, how Couturier and Atkinson react to playing again regularly. It's a long layoff, and they did kind of get their feet wet in the preseason by going against lineups that were not going to be near as physically demanding as what they'll face on a nightly basis. That's the first part. And then after that, I don't have kind of any major, those are my two major injury concerns in the forward group, if I'm being honest. The rest of them, Konechny sat out a few games here and there. Lawton maybe has missed a game here and there sometimes, or Farabee does, or, Farabee, Forrester have injury history. Frost has an injury history, but it's not necessarily anything that's recent per se. Like, you got to go back a few years now to go to Morgan Frost's injury at this point that kept him out for a majority of the year. It's not like it's coming off of last year here. So those guys, I figure, are going to be regulars and should be regulars. Every last one of them. Maybe the other guy that you throw into that grouping is Bobby Brink, because he did have the hip surgery that kept him out for half the year last year, and that is something to keep an eye on. But he sure didn't look like he had any ill effects from that when he was playing in the preseason. He was, the two things that Tortorella talked about the most with him was, obviously he's got playmaking ability and then creativity to go with it. And they kind of go hand in hand. But when you're a creative player and you're kind of, again, fearless in that regard, and then you add the playmaking ability in, they've got a few guys who could finish with a decent number of goals. If you think, Konechny got to the 30 goal mark last year, Tippett was closing in on it. He got over 25. Farabee's been at 20 before. There's no reason to believe that Forrester couldn't be a 20 goal guy. Frost had 19 last year. So they've got guys who were able to get to certain numbers, and you want to see maybe take another step. So if you're in that category that Frost or Farabee was in, that they haven't made it to 25 yet, but they were close to 20 or in that 20 range, you start setting your sights on maybe can you get 5 more, or something like that. And how do you do that? You do that by having more guys around you that can help you score goals. And Brink might be one of those types of guys who is as a playmaker type. I think Frost falls into this category too, because I agree with Dan. His last 2 preseason games were his best. Mm-hmm. And the plays that he was making, particularly against the Islanders, he had the lead pass on the Tippett goal. Forrester was involved in it too. So they both had, it was a really good, that whole play was just a really good outlet, because 4 different guys touched actually all of them did, because York had it behind the net first, got it to Sanheim. It was a quick up to Forrester to Frost, and then Frost found Tippett cutting the other side of the ice, cutting forward to get some space, and got him the breakaway. So if you're having outlets like that and you're doing things that create offensive situations like that, then all of these guys could be improved offensively if you have more guys who are setting things up. Certainly on the power play too, they had a 5-on-3 against the Islanders in that last preseason game, and Couturier made, kind of a traditional Sean Couturier pass to the slot for Travis Konechny, who just quick one-timer and it's in the net. You add that to your power play. I'm not saying it's going to go from 30th to top 10, but it's going to be improved because you have a guy like that back in your lineup. So certainly there's a lot of different avenues where they could be better in a lot of different ways. They could have more scoring. They could be better on special teams at both ends because, yes, you add on the PK, you add Couturier and Atkinson back, and they're penalty killers. But a duo that was talked about by Tortorella specifically was Paling Hathaway, and they were killing penalties at the end of the preseason, and they looked darn good doing it. So I think that you've got a unit there too, and so they've got a lot of stuff in place right now. And I think the other key to this whole thing, and this kind of goes back to the point of injuries that I was talking about at the start of this, is, if you can keep guys together with some consistency, then I'd love to see what they can do for a whole year. It's been hard to do the last several years because they just have guys who end up out of the lineup for too long and then have to try to find a way to fit them back in. So if you can keep guys healthy for long enough and maybe have some consistency with these trios at forward, then I'd love to see what kind of chemistry could be formed by having those guys together. And certainly there are guys that are here that are not going to be part of the long-term future. Like you're not sitting here wanting to see Cam Atkinson succeed this year to have him on your roster 2 years down the line. You want him to succeed so he can prove that he still plays and has value to maybe somebody else when that time comes, to move on from him and give him a better opportunity to win, give you a better opportunity to rebuild the right way. It all, win-win for both sides. But you do want to see it from the guys that you think are going to be part of this. So you want to see that next step from Cates, Tippett, Frost, Farabee, Forrester, Brink, etc. All these young guys. And that's probably the best part to me about this whole offseason and kind of coming into this season, looking at that lineup that way. I just rattled off, I think, 6 names right there, and none of them were a guy who's over, maybe over 25, 26 years old. I didn't even mention Konechny in that group. That's the sign that they're focusing on, as much as, yes, you have a line that has Delorier and Hathaway on it, and you have Atkinson and Couturier in the lineup. You have more guys that kind of overshadow that group and say, look, it's the 27 and under crowd at this point. And that's at least, especially the amount of guys that are 25 and under, that tell you they're truly committed to putting a lineup on the ice that has a good number of young players in it.
Yeah, the Sabres, 2 out of the last 3 seasons, the Sabres have come out like gangbusters to start the regular season. They've got a lot of really young players, and then they've just sort of faded. I wonder if the Flyers might end up doing something similar to that. We'll see. But it really is interesting because Lawton and Atkinson obviously are 2 guys that you would hope that they move them at some point during the season to get some draft picks, get some prospects in here, further the rebuild. But, what happens if this team does come out of the blocks fast and they're sort of hovering around a playoff spot? Are we going to get into one of those situations again where it's Max Payne, where we're either going to, make the playoffs and get blown out in the first round or finish, between picks 9 and 13 or whatever? I don't know. I've really been in the camp that this team was going to be super bad this year. I guess I'm letting myself get talked into the fact that they may be a little bit better. It does help when you look at the Eastern Conference and you're trying to figure out, okay, who are the teams that they're better than? And there's really not a whole lot that immediately on paper you'd say they're better than. But I could also make arguments that teams like the Washington Capitals are going to take a pretty big step back this year, and the Flyers have a much deeper group of forwards and theoretically could be better than that team. Montreal certainly looks like a team that the Flyers could be better than. And then you just don't know with some of these other teams. I mean, I don't know what the impact of Patrice Bergeron, not being with the Boston Bruins is going to have. That team could take a major step back this year. The Islanders, the Islanders seem like they've been, making the playoffs and hovering around the playoffs with voodoo. Like, I look at their roster and I'm like, how has this team been this good? So maybe this is the year that like the wheels totally fall off the Islanders bandwagon. I don't know. But, it is, I can't predict how the season is going to start out, how it's going to go for this team. I hope that they follow the rebuilding script with reference to guys like Lawton and Atkinson and, Mark Stahl and some of these guys as the season goes along. But yeah, it is, I don't know. It's very hard for me to predict this one, how this one's going to pan out.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Eastern Conference, it's something that Elliot Freeman was talking about when Jeff Marek in their podcast today was talking about, I don't know, Philadelphia might be better than they thought. And Freeman's there. Well, the problem is so many teams in the East have improved and they are going to have to play these teams. If you really look at the conference, maybe the Flyers are better than Columbus and Montreal. And Montreal's trying to win a little bit this year. They might be right there with Detroit, but Detroit gets to brink it and added what I thought were basically Band-Aids. But, so the Flyers might be like the second or third worst team in the conference. And I don't want to jump ahead to predictions, but I still see the Flyers falling into that 7 range again. Kevin, what do you think?
I said I think they end up being, to me, I have them right around 5th. And I know that seems like a step backwards, but I think they'll somehow or other be a little bit better than people may expect. But I really do think that many teams got better than they did. I think Columbus committed really hard to the Bedard sweepstakes when the injuries piled up and realized there's no saving this season. We're just going for it. And they got the consolation prize because Adam Fantilli is on their roster, and the Flyers get a really nice close look at him day one. That's the first game of the season, and they're going to see him right away. And not to mention the fact that you also go out and you trade to add a guy like Ivan Provorov to your roster now too. So, and you get, getting Werenski back, Ivan Provorov's on your roster now. Forward wise, too. Yeah, Severson too. And all of these other guys in the forward group that they've been drafting over the years with Johnson, Sillinger, Marchenko, they've got so many young forwards that are going to be interesting to watch, not to mention the fact that, oh, by the way, they've made 2 big splashes at forward over the years with Laine and Gaudreau. Like they've also got a team that I think could really make some noise. I'm not going to put them in the playoff picture, but I do think that they're way better than they were a year ago. And that was because of the fact that they fully committed to the idea that once they had so many injuries, they weren't going for much of anything at that point. I agree that Montreal's probably below the Flyers, probably in that group. And that's really the only team I come away with 1,000% certainty that I feel like would be below the Flyers in the Eastern Conference. Detroit is kind of hovering there because I don't know what to expect from them either. It's kind of the same thing. They got the Brinket now, so that's an improvement. But what about the rest of it? I'm not really sure about that. Washington's an intriguing one for me also because of the fact that I don't know how much they've improved either, really. I mean, I still think they're probably better than the Flyers are because I still think the Ovechkin factor probably wins out on that one despite everything
Backstrom's
else.
Back.
And Backstrom's back also. That's true too. But I will tell you, they would not be one of my playoff teams today. Like I don't see them making the playoffs. I agree with the Islanders too. The Islanders made the playoffs last year, and I think that there are more than enough teams when you look at some of these other teams that finished really close to them in the standings. There's more than enough teams that I think have done more to improve themselves and potentially make up that it's only 2 points we're talking about for some of these teams. The Islanders made the playoffs by 2 points. So I don't see them in the playoffs either. I actually just in the Metro, I flat out swapped them out. I just swapped out Pittsburgh and the Islanders there, and I moved Pittsburgh up a spot and I moved the Islanders down. Simple as that. Like, I think in the Metro, there's a clear cut top 3, and then it's kind of hard to bet against Pittsburgh with the moves that they made, at least for the first year of this. I don't like the long term of the moves that Pittsburgh made, but I do think that for the first year and the immediate effect that it's going to have, that they will be a playoff team. I'm not putting them high up on the pedestal or anything like that, but I do think that they're back in the playoffs, and I don't love the Islanders at all. So but the bottom line is, in terms of how that affects the Flyers, I just don't see them being better than a lot of these other teams. And it's just strictly based on who I think is good in the league, kind of, like who I think based on where players went, what these teams did to either improve themselves or even just stay status quo. Like in the case of Washington, I don't think that Washington necessarily lost too much. They didn't add a ton, but they didn't lose too much either. They wouldn't be at least above the Flyers to me. Yeah. That's kind of the way I see it.
Yeah. Two things pop into my mind. Number one, and Dan, you could tackle one of these. Number one, what is the goal of this season? And number two, how is Danny Briere going to straddle that fence between allowing some of these veterans to prove they still have value or to see what maybe Konechny, like if he's ready to let go of a player like Hart or Konechny so we can get a really big, a higher pick possibly. it's like, how is he going to straddle that fence to find the playing time? Because he's trying to do a lot of different things, and you have to wonder, what is the overall goal to accomplish whatever that is? Kevin, you go first, or Dan, you go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds like they're going to. Well, I don't know what we're going to see with the lineup, but I mean, I think the teams already know the value that a guy like Scott Lawton brings. So I feel like even if you cut back on his playing time a little bit, you're probably still going to be able to get a first round pick for a player like that if you want to move him during the season. Travis Konechny, I think the same thing, but if he's on the roster, he's going to be playing. He's going to be getting big power play minutes. I think he's going to have a really good year. And we'll see what happens with Atkinson. I think you've got to lean towards, playing the kids and knowing that, like I said, these other guys will have the trade value because they are sort of already established players in the league. But what's going to be interesting to me is, again, will they pull the trigger on some of these guys? Like Travis Konechny seems to me like a guy who probably wants to stay here. I don't know. Maybe that's incorrect. But he's also the guy who probably has the most trade value on the roster right now. So do you trade him? The other question mark with a guy like Konechny is the teams that are going to want Travis Konechny are teams that are competing for the Stanley Cup. So you're probably not going to be able to get a high first-round pick for Konechny because the teams that want him don't have those high picks. And we've talked about that before, Isaiah. Like, that'll be a challenge for Briere if he's looking to trade one of those guys. Carter Hart.
Unless they happen to have a pick, that team happens to have a pick from a prior deal.
Yeah, I don't know if we looked at who were the teams next year that might have, top 10 picks owned by a different squad or not. Like, I could probably pull it up like real quick. Let's see, 25.
Like a team like Florida might be on the margins because of all their injuries.
Oh, we've got the Florida draft pick already.
Right? Exactly.
I mean,
Where, but that could be a good news scenario.
Top 10 protected. But yeah, like I'm looking right now, NHL draft order 2024. It doesn't look like any teams projected by Tankathon right now in the bottom 15 have traded their pick. So I think all these teams have their own picks. So, I'm not sure what you're going to get for Konechny. Maybe a team has a really good prospect that you want to add to your pool. Maybe but again, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what you're going to get for a guy like that that's going to make it worth it from a team that's probably going to be competing for the cup. So that's going to be a challenge. Lawton, I think you're fine getting a late first round pick. I think you should be taking that for a guy like that. But I just want to make sure that they're still committed to the rebuild and will trade these guys that are probably not going to be around because there are more young guys pushing in. Like one guy that I really like is Elliot Desnoyers, and Kevin mentioned that a guy like Ryan Poehling could end up maybe being a long-term type of fourth-line center. Well, then, okay, what happens with a guy like Elliot Desnoyers? And there's going to be more and more guys that are sort of going to be pushing. So there comes a point where you have so many players sort of in the same talent range, middle six types of wingers and centers. Like, what are you going to do next year when Cutter Gauthier is here? Who is I guess I'm thinking that maybe Morgan Frost won't be here. But, like, how do you look at the roster now? Well, how do you make room for a Cutter Gauthier, right? If Couturier and Cates and Frost are all on the team, I don't know. Like, these are going to be things that they're going to have to figure out,
Absolutely. Kev?
So to answer the first question of all of this, I think the goal of the season is to have as much success as possible from maybe an individual standpoint while maintaining the draft position as best you can also. And I know that kind of there's elements of that where it's out of your control, so to speak, because you can't control what other teams do in terms of if they are fully at the bottom of the picture and they aren't winning games, that's out of your control. You just control yourself at that point. But I do think like you're at a stage of the rebuild now where you've fully committed to stating that it is what it is, and you're taking steps. You made trades in the offseason, this past offseason, that indicate, okay, these guys aren't coming back, and it's supposed to clear spots for younger players. And you have now Forrester and Brink and Andre and Zamula, who are all kind of part of this thing. Andre and Zamula are not part of this team today if you still have Ivan Provorov, if you still have Tony DeAngelo, and they would have in both cases without a trade. They were both under contract. So without those guys, you by moving those guys and moving on from them, you open the door for the possibility to have 2 younger guys take their place. So that continuing that growth is obviously a key goal. One of the things that I think helps them in this matter, and this kind of goes right into Dan's point, because I'm in agreement with Dan. I like Elliot Desnoyers a lot too. The interesting part was in his preseason, it was becoming evident after watching him for the first handful of preseason games he played that he wasn't standing out as much as a Brink was, or even what Forrester was. And Forrester wasn't overly impressive, but he wasn't standing out to that level. And because of that, it's really easy to make that decision and say, okay, the best place for him today is minor leagues and get another year under your belt playing professionally. And you've got time for that because you have all these players in place, and you have to figure out eventually what to do with Lawton, Konechny, Atkinson, these guys at forward who are going to, be question marks. Lawton and Atkinson are not going to be probably part of the long-term future. They shouldn't be. And Konechny's right on the edge there in terms of what do you decide to do. But again, you got to weigh the value there. That's a big thing. And the only thing that I'm not convinced about at this point is whether or not they are moved in season, like deadline moves this year, or if they wait until the off season, kind of like they did this past off season. But either way, I think before the draft next year, you have to make up your mind on pretty much all 3 of those guys effective immediately. Like that's what the first half of the season should be about, is that if they're going to play, find out that they can play, or let them play in whatever role works best. You need to let Atkinson play just to show he's got any value. Konechny's going to play because he's probably going to be the best forward on the team in terms of talent level today. I'm sure there's other guys who are going to eventually maybe be better than what Konechny is, or could be better. I mean, certainly once you figure out what you're doing with Cutter Gauthier, I think that Cutter Gauthier may have a ceiling that could be better than that, but once you go through that process and actually clear those spaces, I mean, one of the other things you're hoping for, even is in Gauthier's cases, you don't even want I don't even think you want the temptation of having him have the ability to play an NHL game this year. I think you want that team in Boston College to go as far as possible, go to the Frozen Four, play right down to the last week of the NHL season, and then sign him the day after the NHL season's over and say he'll start next year. Like, if that's how you want to play it out, I think that that's the best case scenario. And the thing that's going to be exciting too about this season is a bunch of stuff that's not going to be on your televisions when the Flyers are on. It's going to be, if you can catch a Phantoms game and see what they have going in the minors, it's going to be every time you can see what Matvei Mishkov does in the KHL, or what Cutter Gauthier does at BC, or what Oliver Bonk and Denver Barkey are doing it in London in the OHL, and guys like that. That can be really exciting when you have prospects who are kind of doing what they did this past weekend, for example, and giving people a reason to look at what they're doing now and be hopeful for what they bring down the road, and knowing that it's not something that's immediate, knowing that it doesn't have to be something that happens tomorrow, next week, next year. Like, you don't have to go crazy with that. You can kind of just let that play out and let that work itself out while you go through a season like this, where you try to get yourself in position for maybe another player like that. The top of the draft has talent, and whether you're looking for another forward that goes with Gauthier and Mishkov that could be in your system and could be really talented, or whether you're looking for probably the piece that they really don't have, which is the top end defenseman. That's really the piece that if you can find it, then that's one of the missing pieces that's left. Then certainly you're going to be in a much better position than you were just at the end of last year.
Yeah. I have 2 things. I want to respond to one of the things Kevin said, but I want to talk about Cutter Gauthier for a little bit here, because Saturday night I had the option of watching the Phillies playoff game. I watched a little bit of both, or the Boston College season opener against the defending champs, Quinnipiac. And I watched the Boston College game because I'm an insane Flyers fan and I love the prospects. And so intermissions, I was flipping over to the Phillies game. But I got to tell you, like, Cutter Gauthier was all over the place. And it brought to mind sort of a comparison that I wanted to talk about, which was he plays offensively. Cutter Gauthier plays a very similar game as Eric Lindros did. He obviously is not Eric Lindros. He's not a physical player. He doesn't engage. He doesn't seek out physical play the way that Eric Lindros did. However, playing down the center of the ice, Gauthier probably had 8 shots on goal. He probably had 11 attempted shots. he is a monster down the middle. I have absolutely no doubts whatsoever that he can stick at center at the NHL level. Just from watching this game, obviously he was pretty good last year at center for Boston College, but playing without the luxury of super talented wingers, he was just roaming up and down the center of the ice, getting shots off, going around players. He's a big kid. He's a fast skater. He's got a tremendous shot. He will shoot from anywhere. He can also set people up. Like I've been talking about how since the draft that I would prefer they take David Jiricek. I think I may be changing my mind. Like I think I'm happier with Cutter Gauthier after watching it. He scored the game-winning goal in overtime with 8 seconds left. He took a great pass from Ryan Leonard, who the Capitals drafted, and not for nothing, all three of those freshmen on Boston College, Will Smith, who went number 5, and then Ryan Leonard, who went number 8 or number 9, and then Gabriel Perreault, who went number 23. Those guys were on the same line. Ryan Leonard was far and away the best of those 3 players, in my opinion, in the game. I think Perreault is going to take some time to mature and find his footing. And Will Smith was pretty good, but Leonard looked really good. Anyway, Leonard set up Gauthier for the game-winning goal with 15 seconds left in overtime. Just an absolute rocket of a wrister from above the right face-off dot. And I'm super excited about Gauthier because he just looks like that force down the middle, like a style like Eric Lindros. If you think about the way that Lindros used to play, if you take the physicality sort of out of the game, it's kind of, he's got that physical stature. So I'm really excited about him. One thing I wanted to respond to with Kevin was he talked about how, they had to move out some guys to make room this year. They moved out D'Angelo, they moved out Hayes, and they moved out Provorov. Well, here's the thing. John Tortorella wanted Hayes and D'Angelo gone. Like, he was not going to coach a team that had either Kevin Hayes or Tony D'Angelo on the roster this year. Ivan Provorov didn't want to be here. So the 3 guys that they moved out were guys that it was a no-brainer to move out because they didn't want to be here or the coach didn't want them to be here. You look at a guy like Scott Lawton and Travis Konechny, these are guys who probably want, same with Cam Atkinson. Like, they are guys that John Tortorella loves. They're guys that by and large the fans love. They're guys that want to be here. So that's what's going to make it a little more interesting to me is like, if Lawton was a guy that was in the doghouse with Torts, they would have traded him for a first round pick at the draft this year. But they didn't. And they're holding out, I guess, for better offers. But it is going to be interesting to me because there is a big difference between those guys and the guys they moved out last summer. And that's going to be interesting to see how Danny Briere navigates that situation.
Yeah. So, and it's a great point, Dan. And I know that's always the thing with Tortorella is that, when he has his guys, that kind of resonates throughout the whole organization. And the thing that'll be interesting to me, and kind of one of the things I think about when it comes to this group is, even with Forrester, even with Brink making the roster, they make it with all of those guys on the roster currently. So they weren't necessarily losing, they didn't have to create a spot for them per se. And I wonder if they weren't sure if anybody else would even crack the roster today in terms of that. Like, if this is going to be a slow build to, okay, listen, by the deadline, if Desnoyers is knocking the door down, or if Ola Lixel is part of that picture and he's knocking the door down, or if you're getting closer to the idea that, like, listen, Gauthier is going to be coming sooner or later, then you start thinking about all of these things. So that's why I kind of tended to lean toward the offseason, because I think they did it as prep work. I think they didn't want to let Lawton go because they didn't know, kind of in the same reason, for the same reason that they signed a guy like Garnet Hathaway too. Like, you don't have to sign Garnet Hathaway to be part of the picture going forward, especially for a 2-year deal. But I think they did it as an insurance policy because of the fact that they weren't sure which kids would make it right away. And that kind of goes against the complete, kind of the point of the rebuild, so to speak, because you would want to play younger kids in that situation. But at the same time, I think that that's the reason behind why they did things. Same thing for the reason why they, maybe not the reason why Sean Walker's here, because Sean Walker's here because if it sweetened the deal to get you what you really wanted, which was a first round pick, then you do that every single time. But maybe that's why you signed Mark Stahl, or that's why, you keep Nick Seeler around, or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, so they have guys like that. I hope they get to the point where, because the same thing goes for the defensemen too. I mean, you got 3 defensemen who are on 1-year contracts that, as far as I'm concerned, by the time we get to the deadline in March, you should be prepared for the possibility that you could move all 3 of them, because Andre's doing what he should be doing in his development, and Zamula's doing what he should be doing, and York took a step, and you've got Addard and Ginning, and Helge Grans is down in the minors too. He could be taking a step. You got to take all of those players and think, what happens if they're taking the right steps and getting closer to being where they should be as you approach the deadline? Maybe you don't move one of those guys. Maybe you find it harder to move Walker or something like that because the contract's a little bit richer. But Sealer's making less than $800,000 and Stahl's on a 1-year, $1 million contract. They should not be impossible to move at all. They should be easy to move for teams that want to have an insurance policy on their blue line in the playoffs, 7th defenseman material kind of stuff. And their spots should easily be accessible by or 2 guys like Addard and Ginning, or who are going to probably play at the minors for a good stretch of time before they're actually given the opportunity, unless injuries dictate that. So that's kind of how I want to see it play out, is that I want to see that if they start to notice that younger players are taking the steps needed, that makes them more willing to part ways with guys that they do seem to really love right now, because ultimately those guys become more of the face of the team than Lawton does, or Konechny does, or Atkinson does, and things like that. So that's my hope. But certainly between them, between the prospects we're talking about, I got to chime in on the Cutter Gauthier part of this too, because the goal itself, by the way, is impressive enough as it is. But he kind of, first of all, the thing that's impressive about him playing as well as he does at center there is we got this kind of teaser in the early part of the offseason, if you will, when he was playing in World Championships, and he's playing against guys that are way older than he is at that point. And yet they didn't play him at center during the World Championships. They played him on the wing in World Championships instead. And to see him slot back in at center, and you got to remind yourself he's only a sophomore. It's crazy
Right.
to talk about it like that, but you got to remind yourself he's only a sophomore, and the bulk of that team, or at least a lot of the players we're going to talk about, are freshmen. And he's like the leader of the group in that sense. He's kind of, there's elements where he's a man among boys still in that sense. And those guys are going to be, all of them are probably going to be great players. Leonard already has that skill set. Smith was taken even higher in the draft. I think Perreault is going to turn out to be a really good scorer in the league too. But and it's kind of crazy how almost Smith's the only exception here, but all of them are going to be, look at where they all ended up. Gautier's on in the Flyer system, Leonard's in Washington's, Perreault's in the Rangers system. It's like the Metro just keeps getting richer with some of these guys in that sense. Like, these guys who go to the powerhouse college that knows how to develop players and get them ready for the NHL level, and they're kind of all going to stay in that Northeast corridor like that. It's going to be crazy to watch once they all make the jump. But Gautier's obviously being a second-year player now in college is further along in that. It's kind of already, and like we've already been talking about it like it's a guarantee, but it's obviously kind of morphing into even more of one now. It's when they do sign him, when the year is up, whenever his season is over. And I hope it's a long run for him, because I think that would be a really good, I think he would want to go out on top. He's a competitor. I think you see it even in the games that he was playing in World Championships. He's not a fixture of those World Championship teams for the U.S. just yet. That was his first real taste of it, but he's got that competitive spirit in him. He's got that compete that Lindros had in that sense. And he's a big bulking forward who can skate really well and has a great shot and does all that stuff. Literally, like Dan said, the only thing I don't think that he's got is he's not as physical, but that's kind of the way the game is going too, where you're not asking guys like that to be maybe throwing their weight around as much or fighting guys or whatever. And Lindros was more of that, but he's got all the tools that you would want him to have. And certainly is a key centerpiece to all of this.
Yeah, I liken his game a lot to Rick Nash. Less of a shooter than Rick Nash was less of a shooter, although a very good shot. Rick Nash was really good in close, and he was a really good puck handler. But that big, strong forward, and hopefully Gauthier can cut it at center. That would solve a lot of problems and allow them to focus a little bit more on the defense, because that stud defenseman is going to make or break them in terms of their ability to compete. So just one more, and then we'll just get into some predictions. John Tortorella, is he going to keep that bargain all season, like he talked about with Stahl, sitting him at different times. It almost sounded like they were grooming Mark Stahl to become a coach. Did you get that vibe?
Yeah, and I asked John Tortorella on day one if he kind of saw Mark Stahl in the same role that Justin Braun had last season. Where Braun didn't necessarily play every single night. They actually, by the end of the year, he wasn't I don't think he was playing much at all until like the very end of the year when he was getting close to retirement. And he was very much in that role where he could come out of the lineup and still be a contributor in that sense, So I hope they follow through with that, because that's exactly that was kind of the point of me asking that question to Tortorella, was kind of trying to get that, in terms of like, you're not going to play this guy every night, right? Like you've got other guys who I hope are taking that step and kind of making it hard on you. And that to me, like if they actually do follow through with that and have him out of the lineup on some occasions and, not playing every day, basically, then I hope that what they follow through with on that still turns into exactly kind of what we envision, that he'll have value at the deadline,
Right.
that he'll be that type of player that and kind of that part of the bargain to me. And it kind of is an unspoken part, because Tortorella didn't say this, but I think it is, that you're talking about a defenseman who just played in the Stanley Cup final, 5 months ago, So I would say, I hope that part of the bargain is that you're telling him, we're going to find you a place to go in March where you have another shot to go back. And that's what we'll do for you. You work with our young defensemen. You take part in all of this. You go through with the plan as we need it to go through, and we'll get you somewhere where you have a shot to compete for the Stanley Cup that you want to try to win. That should be all part of it as well. So I think that, and he's an interesting player, because he's got something to offer on the ice still. It's not, I'm not sitting here telling you he's going to score. He's definitely not going to score, because he's never been that defenseman, but he can still play in a lot of situations defensively. Like he can play on your penalty kill, and he can still be that back end third pairing defenseman for you when needed, but he doesn't have to be in the lineup every night. So it kind of becomes a glorified 7, really. And I hope that sticks to be the case, because, especially now that they've taken the step to put somebody else beyond what I was kind of anticipating. I kind of had a feeling Zamula had a good shot to make it. I wasn't sure Andre was going to definitely make it on day one. And now that he is, I hope they stick with that, and they let those guys run with the opportunity, and let Stahl be here for what he's here for. Right now, that's probably being in your opening night lineup, because you're down a veteran defenseman anyway. So I don't see any reason why he wouldn't play on night one. But once you get those guys back, how do you rotate them? And what do you do to keep that going in a direction that works for everybody, him and the team? So I hope they do stick with it.
Gotcha. Okay, I think it's that time of the show where I'm gonna try, and Dan, if you want to hazard a guess on what you think the Flyers are going to do this year in terms of points, where you think approximately you'll finish, and maybe a proviso or a caveat depending on whether who stays healthy or whatever you feel comfortable putting out there.
Oh man, I had my cup prediction ready for who was going to be in the cup. It's
I was just going to go to Flyers, and then I was going to do the cup after that.
Okay, yeah. Let's see. So the Flyers had 75 points last year. What do I think for this year? Where are they going to? I think they could end up with, let's say, 81 points, and I think that they'll end up I think they'll be the 4th worst team in the conference. I think I'm going a little more optimistic than I would have 2 weeks ago or a month ago. So that's kind of where I am. I think maybe they'll be 4th worst in the conference, maybe 7th worst in the league.
Okay. Kev?
I'm really close to that territory. I think there's going to be more teams that are better than they are in the Eastern Conference. So I still have them I still have them 2nd worst. I have only Montreal behind them to me. And maybe that's me giving a little bit right now anyway. I'm fully prepared to eat this later on in the year. I'm giving Columbus a lot of attention, in not in terms of playoff per se, like I said, but just in terms of being better. But I do think the point total is right there for me. It's right there with what Dan said. It's not, I was going to go a little less than that. I was going to say 79.
Okay.
I'm giving them 4 more points than they had last year.
I think real quick, I think the Canadians will be worse than them. I guess the other two teams that I'm kind of have in mind would be the Capitals and the Islanders. But again, that might be too optimistic thinking. I just think one of these years, everything's going to fall off the Islanders. I just have to think it, but we'll see what happens. Maybe their goalies are just too good and it's not going to happen.
Yeah. I think that is insurance. Like that is like you'll never get to 60 points like the Flyers were a couple years ago. If Sorokin and even Varlamov is still a good goalie. But yeah, I actually wrote down that the Flyers would have 81 points and also that they'd be 8th or 9th worst in the league. And now that I do the math on that, I think that could be a little bit lower. I think right around 6 or 7 with that point total, because some of the other teams are so bad, like I still think that Anaheim is going to be terrible. Of course, San Jose might be the worst team in the league. So some of the disparity in the West, Chicago is just going to have, Connor Bedard and not much else. So, and I think St. Louis could really take a tumble too. I'm not sure what's going on out there. So, but I that's why I'm going to go with 81 points. And I would say with the proviso, if they have a major injury, if Couturier has a big setback or Carter Hart is out and a missed significant time, now you could talk about at least, 5 to 7 points off of that. And
yeah, well, that's the big unknown is with Carter Hart, right? I mean, I think a lot of us were assuming he might not be available for most, if not all of the season, but now you just don't know. It seems like the NHL really doesn't want to come out with anything on the Hockey Canada thing. So we just kind of sit and wait. The good thing about them, in the range 5 through 8 draft range is that Kevin talked about what might be available in the draft next year. I mean, I look at it and I really think that they are maybe one right-handed defenseman away from being a team that 3 to 5 years down the road could be a constant cup contender. And there are a couple of really good young right-handed defensemen that are probably going to be available in that range. The kid from Michigan State, the Belarusian kid, Artem Levshinov, who scored his first NCAA goal this weekend. He's a really good, young, rugged, right-handed defenseman with offensive skills. Michigan State's going to be a fun team to watch this year, by the way. But he'll probably be available in that 5 through 8 range. And there's just a number. There's a 6'7" Russian defenseman in the KHL who's just torpedoed up the charts, like a Sean Connery ballistic missile from, the Hunt from Red October. This kid, what is it, like Anton Silayev or something? He's 6'7". He skates really well. He's a left-handed defenseman, but there's just a lot of this kid, Sam Dickinson, who's also left-handed defenseman, plays with Oliver Bonk, looks really good. So even if they don't get a top 3 pick and get a Celebrini or an Yzerman, there are some really good defensemen. And I think they might be one really good defenseman away from having what they need to have if you think that, Michkov will be over in 3 years. So.
Right. Now it makes sense. I mean, that's definitely it. So if you look at the league and what we think is going to happen, want to go first and then you guys could follow up and then we'll call it a night from there. Okay. In the West, I have Vegas, Edmonton, Colorado, and Dallas as your real cup contenders, in my opinion. And in the East, I only see Toronto, Carolina, and the New Jersey Devils. Okay. So if you whittle all that down, and I'm going to go with the Colorado to play the New Jersey Devils in the Stanley Cup Finals. And whether or not Gabriel Landeskog could actually make it back for the playoffs, I don't know. But I do believe that Colorado would make a play for a big forward, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe they trade for Travis Konechny. I don't know. But I think the Colorado Avalanche will use the experience that they have winning that cup a couple of years ago. And I think they have a lot to prove this year. And I think they're going to be Stanley Cup champions again in 2024. Who wants to go next?
You think we can get McCarr for Konechny?
No, I don't think so.
No. Well, then this is my point. What are the Colorado Avalanche going to give us in exchange for Travis Konechny? You want the 30th pick in the draft for him?
Let's go for 25.
Anyway, fine. I'll go. I've got one of the same teams as you. I love the Devils. They would be my pick from the East to get through. I think it's probably, you're right. It's either the Devils, the Hurricanes, or the Maple Leafs. It'd be fun to see if a team like the Sabres or the Senators or the Red Wings can take like a huge step forward this year. It could happen. But yeah, I'm going to go with the Devils from the East, and then from the Western Conference. I think I pick these guys like every year, but I'm sticking with the Dallas Stars. Like, I just think one of these years they're just going to get to the finals. And so I'm going to go for a rehash of, what was it, the 2000 Cup Finals that the Flyers should have won, and Dallas against New Jersey. So that'll be my pick. You'll Jake Ottinger and Miro Heiskanen taking on the Devils could be pretty fun. So.
Okay, and I thought about that myself, and then I thought, they have too many players. It's just my opinion, that have like an expiration date that could kick in at any time, and it just bothers me. And like, we got Suter, you have Joe Pavelski, the ageless one, and you have Tyler Seguin and Ben, and like, is that all going to hold together through the long 82 game season playoff drive? Otherwise, I really do like Dallas. So I'm not criticizing what you're saying. Definitely,
but they have real quick. I mean, but they have. You talk about the young kids. They've got Ottinger, they've got Miro Heiskanen, they've got
Hintz,
Jason Robertson, who's one of the better goal scorers in the league. They've got Rupe Hintz. They've got Wyatt Johnston, who was one of the best rookies last year. And if he makes the team this year, you've got Logan Stankoven, who's kind of like a mix of like Matthew Barzal and he's like a Zach Benson, Matthew Barzal mix. So I think they've got a lot of good young players too. But I see what you're saying.
Yeah. All right, Kev, it's your stage.
Not to be boring, but I have the exact same final that Dan does. I have Devils Stars as well. Same thing, rematch of 2000. I just, having seen the Devils in the preseason, I know it's only preseason, but they've got talent all over the board. So, I mean, they
stars.
Right. And the only thing the Devils do not have in the immediate is they do not have some star-studded goalie, but Vegas showed you don't necessarily need one if he gets hot at the right time. So, that's everything else they've got between the defensive core that they've got now. Dougie Hamilton's obviously the veteran guy there, but a full year of Luke Hughes coming up. Like, can't wait to see what that looks like. Their forward group is ridiculous. And so I love their talent, but I've gone on for years and years about what I think of the way that Dallas has built their team, the way that they've gotten cornerstones at every facet at this point. Robertson's the forward that I think is Robertson and Hintz are both kind of the forward group to me that are both the forwards that are kind of cornerstones, because that we got one who's the scorer, and then you got one who's the two-way dynamo who could, just do everything right.
Mm-hmm.
Heiskanen's the defenseman that just completely takes over that defensive core and is great in his own right. And I love what Jake Ottinger brings to them. And I keep thinking, like, I think Dallas is the team that probably wins it this year, or at least that's what my gut feeling is, because they kind of are on a Vegas path, like the way that Vegas was last year, where they've had some, they've got members of that team who were in the COVID bubble, who got to play in the 2020 Stanley Cup final. And then they got to a conference final last year and got a taste of it. And the year before that, they got knocked out in the first round when they probably deserved a better fate because their goalie was playing out of his mind. And I think that the more that you go through those experiences, especially together as a young core, the more likely you are to put it all together at the right time. So I love their group. And I think and I love the way the Devils have done it too. Like, I think that the Devils were so much of an afterthought for going into last season in terms of it's just a hot start. It wasn't anything. And then it just kept going all year long. And now you really see what they've got. I think they're right there. I said this when we did YWT yesterday that I hate it. Here's where I'm going to tell you how much I hate the playoff format, because really the Eastern Conference final to me would be Carolina, New Jersey. And we don't get that as an Eastern Conference final,
right? But
we should, because that to me they are the two best teams to me in the Eastern Conference. And the same, I don't know if it wouldn't be the same thing, because Dallas could play Vegas or play Colorado out of there, or not Colorado. Dallas would play Colorado in the second round potentially, but could play Vegas, could play Edmonton. But people feel like Vegas, Edmonton's that way too. Like, we're getting two great teams and they got to play each other in the second round because they're in the same division. So, but I'm curious to see how this whole season turns out. But that's what I'm going with. I'm going Dallas Stars over New Jersey Devils. I'm going reverse of what happened in 2000. when Dallas was looking to be repeat champions that year. I think this time they actually just get it done.
Yeah, get that foot out of the crease. That was 99. Yeah, I was rooting for Dallas. And their coach was Dave. He took over for Hitch. Dave Tippett.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and of course, by that point, we just hated the Devils after 95 and all that. So, all right. Hey, we're going to wrap it up right there. Kev, obviously, you have the YWT podcast. You're on 97.3 ESPN. What else can you tell people about what you got going on and where people can find you on social media?
Yeah. So same as always, 97.3ESPN.com for all the stories and all that type of stuff like that. I'll hopefully be on a few times during the course of the season, in between all the other fun stuff that's going on in Philly sports right now. Also sportstalkphilly.com, YWT podcast all year long, all season long, just looking forward to another year of this. I posted this the other day when I got down there for the first preseason home game of the year that I got to cover. This is 10 years for me covering the team. So looking forward to what year 10 brings, and hopefully a lot of positivity, like we were talking about, some positive steps in the right direction for where this whole thing's going.
Excellent. Kevin, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure, guys.
Yep, thanks, Kev.
You got it. Take care.
Take care. All right. Dan, just get your final thoughts and contact info.
Yeah, I just want to see if I'm falling into this trap of being too optimistic. We'll see. But I'm excited to see some of these young kids perform. I like Emile Andre a lot. Anyway, yeah, you can find me on Twitter at dsilver88, and I'm looking forward to Thursday night. I'm looking forward to watching, as Kev said, Michkov this year, Gauthier this year. It should be. There's some things to look forward to, even though the Flyers are probably not going to be a playoff team. So, but yeah, let's get it going.
Absolutely. Yeah. The Flyers open up in Columbus on Thursday night. Then on Saturday the 14th, they play an afternoon game in Ottawa. Then they're back home against the Canucks on the 17th, their home opener. And then they play 2 nights later at home against visiting Edmonton Oilers. And somewhere in there, we're going to come back and talk about some of these games. You can follow me, Isaiah, ISAIAH _ 520. Isaiah, don't forget the _ 520. I talk about a whole bunch of stuff. And if you don't like that, hey, that's okay. Make sure you follow the podcast account at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck on Twitter. And of course, we have a backup plan getter in case something blows up. It's at O&B Puckcast, at O&B Puckcast. And of course, you can find us on about a dozen podcast platforms: Apple, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, Amazon Audible, Google. We have a YouTube page. Just plug in there, O&B Puckcast. We have a Facebook page. And if you would just rate and subscribe, especially on Apple and Spotify with the rating, it helps move us up the charts when people are looking for a Philadelphia Flyer podcast, or in this case, podcast. We do appreciate it, and we love your support, and we're glad to be back for another exciting season. So until next time, everybody, take care.